welcome to lesson 50B, because I just got to keep squeezing them in. My numbering system has no logic to it. Utopia, nowhere. We've presented the whole second semester of this class and the whole last 2,300 years of Western civilization essentially as this, as the ongoing struggle between Plato's way of seeing reality and Aristotle's way of seeing reality. And as you'll recall, at least at first, and for most of that period of time, Plato won. And what that meant is that people shifted their focus away from Aristotle's concept of science and put all their energy into the kinds of things Plato was concerned with, which didn't include the things of this world, because for him, this world is just a shadow on the wall. What ends up happening is most of science freezes and then is ultimately lost for centuries and centuries and centuries, even as far back as the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire, they were great at stealing other people's ideas and using other people's ideas. But in the whole time that Rome ruled half the world, the Romans invented exactly nothing. They just reused the little bit of technology, and they used it well. But they were among the least creative people in the world, because even then, Aristotle had shrunk to just a pale, Plato would have gotten a kick out of it, a pale shadow of himself, and everybody sides with Plato. When the empire becomes Christian, Christianity, as we explored, is thoroughly Platonic at its roots. Now, you will sometimes hear this story told by people who have an agenda and want to say, therefore, it is Christianity itself that knocked down the splendors of ancient science. That's not fair, that's not true. By the time Christianity comes around, Plato had won centuries earlier. It will ultimately be within the Western Christian world, by Western Christians, that science is relaunched, especially in the scholastic movement. Let's build a bridge now. Let's build a bridge from where we left off in recent lessons. We talked about the Reformation movement, and I just want to give you a little view of once the wars of Reformation, once those fires died down, peace was restored originally by an agreement that in every country, the king would determine what the religion of the country would be. And the way, at least in Western Europe, it was divided up is that most of northwestern Europe embraced Protestant Christianity, and that remains the majority faith in most northern European countries, including Norway, where Sophie lived if she had been real. Southern and Central Europe plus Ireland remained with Catholic Christianity. Protestant Christianity, as we talked about, is divided and subdivided into a number of churches, a number of denominational institutions. So after the Reformation, it's no longer meaningful to speak of the church as a single institution with a great deal of influence in society. Now it becomes the churches. Catholic Church for all this territory, but the many Protestant churches for this territory. As far as the colonies that start to be being built, well, the colonies just go the way of whoever their colonizer is. So Latin America, which includes Florida, California, New Mexico, Arizona, is going to be majority Catholic for the last 500 years. The original 13 colonies of the U.S. minus Maryland are going to be Protestant. We then briefly hinted at the Enlightenment, one of the last things Alberto taught Sophie about in the last lesson. The Enlightenment, I said, what I love about the Enlightenment is the one time that nerds are the ones who drive the changes in history rather than men with swords. The Enlightenment is nerds who like to talk about philosophy, sitting around, sipping coffee, wearing pantyhose. It's just the style of the time, and talking about big ideas. The Enlightenment project was to recreate society on the basis of logic and reason, with the hope that that would lead to a better world, a world with more freedom and a world with more happiness. And it did. It did. Most of this lesson today is going to be the asterisk at the end of the sentence. But I am a believer in the Enlightenment project and in the success of the Enlightenment project, in the progress we've made since the 1600s, 1700s, is largely due to the Enlightenment. You wouldn't want to go back in time and live in any other time. The things we enjoy now, good health, medical care by doctors who know what they're doing, all the inventions, the fact that we're sitting in an air-conditioned room. I don't know how anyone ever lived in Florida before 70 years ago or 50 or whenever they invented air conditioning. The fact that we live in we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, that, I'm poor in this country for the most part, if I can't afford a cell phone. I'm poor in this country for the most part, if I don't have a big screen TV. For most of history, most people are just barely able to eat. In a democracy, who doesn't love democracy? Who doesn't love being able to have a say in how we are governed? Who doesn't love the rights that our government, at least in theory, exists in order to preserve? We wouldn't have any of that without the Enlightenment movement. Comma. Like Sir Mix-a-Lot, there's a big but. So I hope you like big buts, because there's a big but coming. But life is complicated. People are messy. And the path from the men in pantyhose sitting around the table talking about big ideas to the freedoms and the wealth and the health and the happiness that we enjoy was anything but smooth. So let's look at some of these Enlightenment thinkers more closely. One thing they all have in common. So the thinkers of the Enlightenment, many of them are Christians. Whether they be Protestants are probably more represented in the Enlightenment thinkers. They're also Catholic Enlightenment thinkers. And some of them move in different directions that we'll talk about in a second. What they generally have in common is they're opposed to the power of the church, or now the power of the churches, in society. They're not necessarily opposed to pastors teaching in the pulpit of church, but they don't want the churches meddling in the law. You begin to see a mutation in Christianity, not across the board. This is largely a Protestant Christian phenomenon. You start to see a mutation in Christianity around this time, the 1700s. You start to see the emergence of something called fideism. Fideism is the idea that faith and reason are completely separate. That if I'm going to be a person of faith, it doesn't count if what I say I believe are things that I have reasoned myself to, the way Thomas Aquinas and the Scholastics and most of the Christian tradition would say was at least possible. That the things I accept on faith must be accepted solely on faith. Some people will take that to mean that if the things that I accept on faith go against what I experience with my senses, go against reason, go against evidence, that it's my senses and the reason and the evidence that are lying. You see this living on today in, especially in more fundamentalist varieties of Christianity and their response to things like evolution and dinosaur bones and Big Bang and all that. Others will launch from fideism to say, faith and reason totally separate? Cool. Who needs faith? And you'll start to see for the first time since ancient times people willing to step forward and say, you know what, I don't have faith and I don't want faith. One variety of those people are known as deists. Deists believe in God, but they don't have faith. They believe that reason demands there must be an all-powerful creator. Nothing can come from nothing, all right? So they accept Aristotle's argument for a first cause, prime mover. But they say, surely God made this universe and he made it strong enough to take care of itself. He built a universe with natural laws that don't require him to come in and mess with stuff anymore. It's like when somebody makes a watch and winds up the watch, well, they don't have to keep pushing the hands of the watch. The deists will say, God's like a watchmaker or a clock maker. He's never spoken to prophets. He's never inspired any books. He's never worked any miracles. He's gone about with his life or his eternity or whatever he is. The best way to worship God, say the deists, is to A, learn about nature, because that's how God revealed himself, and B, to be kind to others. Somebody deal with her, please. Give this to the lady at the door. And to be kind to others and to do good. So really influential people in our civilization have been deists. You may not know much about the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz or the philosopher Voltaire, big Enlightenment figures, but Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, George Washington, anybody heard of him? No. No? Never. Oh, it blow your mind. Okay, you know how there's a president now? Yeah. And there was one before him? Well, as Aristotle argues, everything must have a first cause. George Washington was the first president. Wow. Numero uno. If you ever pull out a $2 bill and rip it in half, his face will magically appear on it. Is that how that works? James Madison, James Monroe, Adam Smith, a big defender of capitalism, Victor Hugo, Abraham Lincoln, Jules Verne, Mark Twain, Thomas Edison, Neil Armstrong. Who's Neil Armstrong? First man on the moon, as far as we know. You're still super, no, I was the first man on the moon, but you're still a big conspiracy theorist, aren't you?
It's the Russians.
Yeah, I meant to beat that out of you, but then the COVID thing happened, so we lost a whole order.
Oh.
Yeah. That's what they want you to think. The Enlightenment's also the first time among a minority of people, a small group of people, but it's the first time that people are also willing to come out publicly and say, you know what? I don't believe in any of it. Before the Enlightenment, if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, keep that to yourself. Because what are they going to do to you?
Die.
Yeah, they'll light you on fire. Roast some marshmallows right off your face.
You don't believe in heaven? Let's send you to it.
The 18th century is when we really start to see the first atheists being prominent in society. There are different varieties of atheism. We can speak of a soft atheism, which is just the lack of belief in God or gods. A soft atheist would just say, the evidence doesn't suggest to me that there are any other beings. A hard atheism is the belief that there are no gods. A hard atheist would say, the evidence tells me that there is no God. Agnosticism means, I don't know. Gnosis is a Greek word for knowledge. And a soft agnosticism would say, I just don't know. The evidence is not clear enough for me to make a decision. A hard agnostic would say, no evidence one way or the other on this question is ever possible. What are you going to put under a microscope to tell you whether there's a God? You going to run a blood test? What are you going to check for? That would be a hard agnosticism. And then there's anti-theism. Someone could hold any of these four and still think, well, I don't believe in it, but religion's fine for everybody else if they want to. Or could you even have atheists who have said, I don't believe in it, but society needs it. I don't believe it, but I want you to believe it so that you're afraid of God and stay out of my way. Kind of cynically. Anti-theists are those that say that the whole business is bad. That belief in God or gods or the practice of religion is bad for society and it should be opposed. Yes? So they don't think there's enough evidence to make a decision. So agnostics say, I don't know. I don't know. An atheist either says, I know there's not, or I'm pretty sure there's probably not. The agnostic says, what do I know? You know? An agnostic would look at the question of, is there a God, kind of like the question of, is there life on other planets? Well, some may say probably, but is there evidence? Some say yes, others look at that evidence and say, that's just a fingerprint on the, picture or something. So an agnostic is I don't know. The atheist says no or probably not. And the anti-theist says we need to put a stop to it no matter what. Some by arguing. We probably know people like that. Today's anti-theists like to argue online. They can't stand those are the kind of people who set an alarm when every time someone's wrong on the internet. And, go at it.
The Twitter users.
But there have been anti-theistic movements that have kind of imitated the worst behavior of the Middle Ages and will try to spread unreligion, try to destroy religion with the use of violence. Dennis Diderot was one of the leading Enlightenment figures. He gave us the first encyclopedia. He's an example of an anti-theist. Man will only be free when the last king is strangled with the entrails, intestines, of the last priest. Now, what does he look like?
That's hardcore.
Why do you look like this?
Why does he look like that? Why is his face like that?
So spaced out.
Yeah. Well,
He's zooted, bro.
I don't
It's
know,
double wide.
I don't know. He might take. Maybe he takes everything to extremes because he takes his views on religion to extremes. Never be free till the last king is strangled with the entrails, with the guts of the last priest. But he also gave us the encyclopedia. So
That's hardcore.
The encyclopedia.
let's get to the heart of today, though. This is Irine Fillet. She is not the heart of today. The heart of today is an idea that emerges in the Enlightenment called utopia. What's utopia mean? Who knows what a utopia is? Hey, Lee lad.
It's a place where everything is like right and correct and happiness and nothing but happiness.
Yeah, happiness and nothing but happiness. A perfect society. A society with all the problems solved. Who wouldn't want to live someplace like that? Rhetorical question. A society where teachers do not punch you're the prom queen, aren't you?
Yeah.
I've been wanting to punch a prom queen since I was 6. I did not say that, especially on video. These are jokes. We joke. We joke.
We joke here.
The word actually comes from this fella, St. Thomas More. He was Chancellor of England under King Henry VIII. They were good buddies. More wrote a book called Utopia, a satire on a fictitious perfect world that he invented. His good friend Henry VIII then had his head cut off because Thomas More wouldn't approve of Henry VIII breaking the Church of England away from the Pope. He gave us the word utopia. The Enlightenment introduces utopianism. It's one thing to tell stories about a perfect world. But in the Enlightenment, you start to find people who believe that we can make this world, we can make humanity perfect. Utopianism is a belief in the perfectibility of our world and of our species. It's about the noblest goal you can think of, isn't it? Make people perfect. Make people perfect? Wouldn't that be awesome? Now we've got optimism. We can do it. Problem. So, Kimberly Valle, let's say you have an idea of how to make the world perfect, okay? And let's say Irine Fillet disagrees with you, and she wants to stop you from spreading your idea. What does that mean? How do you feel about that? But you believe that your opinion will make life perfect for everyone, and she's getting in the way of that. It means that Irine Fillet wants to make the world worse. I want to make it so that Smelanie is smiling all the time and happy all the time. Iran Fillet wants to make you sad. She wants to stop you from having a perfect life. She wants to make everything worse. She is the enemy and she must be destroyed. That's the inevitable flip side of utopianism. If I believe that I can make the world perfect, get on board with me, or you are the enemy. One version of utopianism was the French Revolution.
Oh, movies.
Right? So, it was the first anti-monarchy democratic revolution after ours. Right? So it's France wants to get rid, they've got a particularly strong monarchy, particularly invasive monarchy. And so the revolutionaries, they're fighting, and they're fighting to make a perfect world. Their slogan is liberty, fraternity, that's brotherhood, and egalitarianism or equality. Great quotes, aren't they? In fact, we're not going to read every word on here, but these are excerpts from a revolutionary French document called Declaration of the Rights of Man. One of the most beautiful things ever written. This is what the French revolutionaries want. They want a place where we believe people are born free and remain equal in rights. That government exists to preserve rights. That liberty consists in freedom to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. That no one disquieted just means messed with, all right? So if Haley's got opinions that I don't like, it doesn't mean I get to hit her in the face with a notebook. I'm not allowed to do that, right? Teachers can't just hit students in the face with notebooks, right? The Declaration of the Rights of Man is one of the most beautiful and noble documents ever written. The revolutionaries want to make France a utopia. And so when you disagree with them, say, you don't like it that they want to get rid of the church and replace it with a new religion that worships reason as if it were a goddess. If you disagree with how they want to organize society, well, we use the term reign of terror to describe the French Revolutionary government. Tens of thousands of people beheaded, eventually including the King of France and the Queen Marie Antoinette, and ultimately even including the French revolutionary leader, Robespierre, until the whole thing collapses in ashes and a new emperor by the name of Napoleon rises up out of those ashes. That's what the Declaration of the Rights of Man brought us? No. That's what certainty that that declaration could make the world perfect brought us. Thomas More wrote Utopia. He picked a word that literally means nowhere. Nowhere. There is no utopia. And the people who believe otherwise can be incredibly dangerous. Like this fella, Karl Marx, a philosopher and an economist. He wrote two incredibly influential works, Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx looks at economic inequality in society. He looks at the fact that there are people who can work 18 hours a day and still not have enough money to feed their families. He looks at the disconnect between the super wealthy and the poor. And Karl Marx says, you know what? All of history is to be defined as the combat, the struggle for power between those who own the stuff and the poor who make the stuff. One word in Karl Marx changed him from doing more than anyone else to make the world better to having more blood on his hand than anyone else. And that's the word all. He wants to build a utopia. All of the trouble in the world is the result of a struggle for power between the poor and the wealthy. If all the trouble in the world comes from that instead of a lot of the trouble, if you just said a lot of the trouble, sweet. all the trouble? That anyone who's not on board with communism becomes the enemy and must be destroyed. And when there finally is a massive communist revolution in Russia, that's what happens. You don't agree that all the problems in the world are caused by economic inequality? Well, then you can go die in the gulag, or this 11-year-old communist soldier will stab you to death. There is no utopia. Utopia is nowhere. The most dangerous idea in history is that we can perfect the world. Enter Joseph Stalin, second leader of the Soviet Union, killed 20 million people, almost twice what Hitler killed. In a minute? In a minute. Like a little minute. Oh.
Why do you talk so much about Hitler and not that guy? And that guy killed
Because Stalin was our ally in World War II. Hitler was so we teamed up with the second worst person in the world to take down the first worst person in the world. It's like teaming up with Dr. Doom to fight Thanos. Yeah. Hitler didn't kill as many as Stalin, but that's because Stalin got like 30 years to rule, and Hitler didn't. So Hitler might have killed 100 million. One more utopian vision we'll talk about. The modern era introduces the notion that we can make the species itself perfect. By eugenics, that means good genes. That sounds nice. Not these are good genes, good genetics. We want strong, healthy people. So we won't let the weak, unhealthy people breed. So how about this? How about if you're physically challenged, if you're mentally retarded, if you're sexually promiscuous, or your sexual orientation is anything other than straight as an arrow, or if we just don't care for the, shall we say, tone of your skin, we just make it so you can't have kids. Oh, no, we're trying to make the world better. So look, after we make it so you can't have kids, we'll take care of you. You're going to live a very comfortable life. But your filthy genes are not with you. That's the eugenics movement. Sounds repugnant, doesn't it? It was all over the West, all over the free democratic West. And it happened to have a #1 fan. You know, I hope we're all agreed that Hitler said that if the word evil means anything, it applies to Hitler. But he wouldn't have thought so. He would have thought what he was doing is good. He would have thought he's just building a perfect world. And as soon as I get the imperfect people out of the way, mankind can live happily ever after. There is no utopia. Back in October, lesson 27, Introduction to Philosophy, we said that wisdom, Lady Wisdom, is the voice in your ear whispering at all times, you could be wrong. Those who say that we can make the world perfect don't accept that. They draw sharp lines of division between the good and the bad. And they let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Because if we think, look, we can never make the world perfect, guess what? That sounds like bad news. Doesn't it sound like bad news? If we can never make the world perfect, that means we can always make the world better. And that's what gets taken away from us. That's what gets robbed of us when instead we chase after utopian dreams. So what's the verdict on these two? Very quick verdict on these two. Let's say Plato and Aristotle travel through time and they say, we're going to solve the COVID problem. You ask Plato, he's going to say, it's already solved because the world's not real, and so COVID isn't real. But if you must do something, go light a candle and pray about it. Aristotle's going to say, look, bring me some prisoners, let me inject them with COVID, and let me strap them to a table and cut them open. Taking one without the other one without the other, and this is my opinion, you don't have to agree with, neither one without the other leads to a healthy society. Right? It may be, I happen to think you need Aristotle in the driver's seat, but I also think you need Plato in the back seat saying, think about larger questions, larger issues. It may be that Plato's concerns are more important. You know, Plato asks questions like, is there eternal life? And can what you do in this world impact how you spend it? Well, if the answer to either of those questions are yes, well then sure, that's the most important thing. But importance and urgency are not the same thing. And so I think if we have the guy in the driver's seat who's focused on what we know, without silencing the guy in the back seat who's focused on what we hope for and what we believe, I think there's a more balanced approach to society. You don't have to agree with that at all. So imagine this. Imagine this is an absurd scenario. This wouldn't happen. But you've got a mother at home, and she's got a young child, and the child falls and gets hurt, seriously hurt. The child needs to get to the hospital. And the mother looks at her watch and says, I'm sorry, I'm late for church. And so she leaves the child to die. Nobody would think that's not a true story. Nobody would think that was acceptable. No church would think that's acceptable. That's Plato without Aristotle. But Aristotle without Plato is nuclear weapons, chemical warfare, technology that pollutes the environment and kills off species and someday kills us off. The more we can put the two visions in balance, I think the healthier our society will be. Healthier and healthier and healthier, with every generation is a possibility, but not a guarantee. Perfection is like a horizon. You never reach it, but you always reach toward it. That's all I need from you today. Thank you, Kevin.